Hello, everyone. Hello, good evening, and welcome to this Ceftus event. We really appreciate you being here with us this evening. I know everyone's a little bit zoomed out these days, too much online. So it's really great that you all managed to, carve out a space in your online diaries and find a quiet corner of your home and maybe prize the family iPad from the clutches of a small child in order to join us this evening. And if you are going to do all that and carve out some time these days, I can think of few better reasons to do it than to join us in conversation with our guest, who I'm very, very happy to introduce, an absolute honor to introduce, Ece Temelkuran, award-winning novelist, political commentator, journalist, published in the New York Times and the Guardian, Turkey's most read political commentator twice, and of course, author of How to Lose a Country, which is a guide to the warning signs that a country is descending from a democracy to a dictatorship. I could go on, it's a very long list of accomplishments, but I'm just going to leave it there so that Ece can give us a brief introduction to this subject of this evening. Are we losing the world as we know it? After that, I'm going to have a brief chat with Ece, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So I'll leave it over to you, Ece.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for your kind words. Tonight, well, I'm like, what is better than talking about fascism on a nice evening when we're all locked down and when we feel like apocalypse is going to happen tomorrow? Today's topic, and it was my choosing actually, are we losing the world as we know it? And the question is yes. But the answer is yes, but it is not as apocalyptic as it may sound. We're losing the world as we know it because a new form of fascism is in town, and it looks like it feels like a joke. So that is why, actually, we're one of the reasons why we're losing the world as we know it. As you mentioned, I wrote this book, How to Lose a Country: 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. And I try to lay out the common patterns, global common patterns of fascism, authoritarianism, and right-wing populism. Although the countries may be different from each other, like Britain, United States, Turkey, Russia, and several other European countries, all these countries, as far as I can see, have experienced right-wing populism, authoritarianism, and this new form of fascism in exactly the same way. That is why I came up with these 7 patterns, seven common patterns of a new form of fascism. And the book is written, like ironically written like a manual for beginner dictators, but actually it is also it is for those people who want to, who need to protect themselves from this new form of fascism. And I wanted to tell the rest of the world, especially the Western countries, that this is going to happen to them, which unfortunately came true. So my, Cassandra prophecies proved true, especially in the last few years. What I see when I look at these countries is that this new form of fascism starts showing up in the political stage by creating a movement, not a political party, but a movement. The word movement is on its own very promising because it promises action, renewal, change, as opposed to the static term of party. And it is also creating this elusive, ambiguous, and amorphous sense so that it can include as many people as possible. What they do, these right-wing populists do, is they create a movement, and as soon as they show up on the political stage, they split people into two: real people and the oppressive, corrupt elite. it puts all of us in a quite difficult position, because when you call yourself the real people, automatically you declare the rest of the country unreal people or not real citizens. So those people who suddenly find themselves being unreal citizens, are supposed to either prove that they are as real as the real people, like the right-wing populists, or they have to prove that these right-wing populists are not the real people, which is like a logic, a jumbo mumbo of logic. It is something that is in the very beginning puts people in an impossible position. And the second thing, as soon as they form a movement, the second thing they do is they start disrupting the rationale and terrorizing the political language. They propose, they pose, or rather, let me put it this way, they come to the political stage with this almost schizophrenic logic. For instance, you're talking about climate change or global warming, and suddenly they talk about the earth is, earth being flat. And suddenly you are like off guard, and this is what they do. This is the strategy they use. And simple dialogue becomes impossible because they attack the rules of logic when they are talking. That is why talking to all these Brexiteers or Trumpeteers have been impossible for British and American people, and we have seen it since a few years now. They operate in two ways, one with spin doctors of the party or the movement, and second with the apparatchiks of this political movement. They invade the social media sphere especially, and they do not argue with you necessarily, but they make it impossible to have an argument, to have a discussion. It is not that they are attacking you, but they are attacking the communication sphere itself. They are terrorizing this communication sphere so much so that you cannot even exist there. So you rather retreat, or you find yourself in a cage fight with these apparatchiks or spin doctors of the movement. And of course, the unregulated communication sphere, the social media, unfortunately, we don't have regulations for that yet, for that sphere yet. It makes it easier for them to turn the truth to a commodity, which goes to the highest bidder. So we have two problems. There is this one political movement that is disrupting the rationale constantly, and that is terrorizing the political language and using these things as political tools on purpose. And we have the unregulated social media sphere where truth can be anything if enough people say it is. So this combination makes it really hard to have a proper political dialogue, to have a proper political discussion about anything. What they do also, which is the third commonality, which is the third pattern that is repeating itself in every country, is that they are using the post-truth era very good. And I do think that loss of shame or shamelessness is a political tool that is used, very effectively used by right-wing populists and authoritarian leaders in this new form of fascism. Especially in Western countries, and especially among journalists, post-truth and fake news, all these things have been considered as a technical problem. They thought that, especially New York Times was carrying the flag of this, they thought that if we, double down on fact checking, if we prove that all the fake news are fake, whatever, they thought that we could get rid of this. But I do think that post-truth is not a technical question, but a moral question. At least it is creating a moral question, because when you don't know what truth is, you don't know what is wrong and right is, morally right and wrong. And then in this post-truth world, I think shamelessness became a political tool for these right-wing populists because they could lie ruthlessly. So loss of shame, loss of truth, I think they are two very much related, actually interrelated matters in this new world of ours. And the fourth pattern that is repeating in countries where right-wing populism is on the rise is dismantling the judicial and political mechanisms. One thing we have to know is that right-wing populists or authoritarian leaders or this new form of fascism has no ideological consistency. I am very, skeptical making references to Second World War, to Nazism, when we are talking about this new form of fascism, because at least then they, like it or not, they had an ideal for human being. They had an idea for what they wanted to do. They had a goal, a political goal. But now what we see is all these authoritarian leaders with no ideological consistency, with no apparent political goal, except for holding on to power, clinging on to power, and not letting it go. So this is the most ruthless form of pragmatism. And the lack of ideology is filled, the vacuum that is caused by the lack of ideology is filled by this ruthless pragmatism. And the fifth commonality is designing their own citizen. They design their own citizen from the very beginning, from the first day they create the movement, and they split the people into two, real people and the oppressive elites. And it is very interesting for me to say that Erdogan supporters, Boris Johnson supporters, Trump supporters, even though they speak different languages, they come from different cultures. At some, at some level, they look like they are cut from the same cloth. They are tailored by the same leader. That is why Turkish social media is full of jokes about Trump supporters or Boris Johnson supporters, because they know what, the opposition in media know what the opposition in United States and Britain are dealing with. And they have this very interesting joke on Turkish social media. Speaking to right-wing populists feels like making a smoothie without the lid on, which is, I would say, quite true. And these, one of the commonalities between these supporters of right-wing populism is that they are extremely adaptable people. They have this high elasticity in their souls, because of the ruthless pragmatism and because of lack of ideology, these leaders shift constantly. They change their narrative, they change their political goal, they change their arguments, and all these supporters, like fish shoaling, they follow him constantly, and they don't feel the shame of being inconsistent, which is another interesting thing that becomes very exhausting for those people who are critical of right-wing populism, especially emotionally, especially. And the second commonality is political humor. And this mostly goes for Britain, I think, because it is, making jokes to underestimate dangers is a national sport, I think, in Britain. But it was also a big thing in Turkey. Political humor, up to a certain degree, is a great tool for opposition, for opposing the authoritarianism. But then it becomes too comfortable a shelter. And people feel like, as long as I can joke about this, political reality, nothing will happen to me. So it creates an illusion of unrealness. Whereas while we are making the jokes, the authoritarian leader and their supporters are making new regulations in our lives, and we more and more feel like we have no say. And the lack of right to change anything, the lack of our voice becomes more and more is filled by more and more laughter. And 7, and the last step is when everything is too late, when things are really horrible, is designing your own country. And this is the classic McCarthy motto. This is where the McCarthy motto goes, love it or leave it. Turkey is in this stage now, but I don't think, several other countries that are, in the West, in Western Europe, are not in this step yet. But when that step comes, it is upfront fascism, and those who are speaking against the leader are eliminated in several ways. What is interesting, there's an upside to this story, that everybody is experiencing the same maddening, idiotic pattern. And it is the fact that we are now in the same mess altogether. Because 10 years ago, it was really almost impossible to tell a British person what's happening in Turkey, how maddening it is, how idiotic it is, and so on, or an American person. And until Trump came to power, until Boris Johnson came to power, they didn't actually believe that, that this could happen to them. But now, we are in the same mess. That means that we are speaking the same, we are speaking with the same vocabulary. When we say that, it is maddening, a British person can now understand this. American can understand this. So, and this is why I wrote the book, actually, so that we understand each other, because fascism in one country cannot be beaten. It should be a global solidarity to beat fascism, because it is such a contagious virus, almost like the virus that we have today, that you cannot confine it in one country, and you cannot beat it in one country. We need global solidarity, so it's good that we are now speaking the same language. This is one reason, this new form of fascism is one reason for us losing the world as we know it. But the other reason is the planet is exhausted. We are exhausted of this new form of fascism and all this, incredibly nonsense political leaders, but also the planet itself is exhausted of the system which we call capitalism. I think the planet is speaking in all its tongues, through soil, through water, through air, and screaming and asking for help. And we very calmingly call this global warming, but it is, I think, more than that. It is as if, in that Gaia theory, as if this planet is an organism and it's protecting itself against the human beings. I think we felt it more or less during the pandemic, when everybody was in their houses. We saw the animals came out, we saw all the fish in the sea back again, and so on. And many of us thought that, oh, maybe it is us who are contaminating the entire, planet. Maybe we are not needed on this planet, because we kept on seeing that without us, actually it looks better, which is interesting emotional trauma, I think, for all of us. It was so. The world is tired because of the system that extracts everything, extracts life from human being, extracts, minerals from the earth, extracts water from the sea, and it almost, stabs the earth constantly. But for some reason, this greed, this winner takes it all, this more and more, bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger, this kind of, these ideals, which are the, pillars of capitalism, although these pillars have been there only like a few centuries, somehow we take it as a given as humankind. We cannot imagine end of capitalism as easily as we can imagine the end of the world, which is the tragedy of humankind. And what we are going through today, both because of this new form of fascism, and also because of this, exhausted planet, what we are living is dominantly fear. Unfortunately, fear is the main element of fascism. And fear is actually the antonym of freedom. So what we have to do, I believe, is to find a way not to get rid of this fear, but befriend our fears, because we are going to be living in fear for several reasons in the coming decades. But there is nothing to be afraid of. We should not fear our fears, and we have to, kind of embrace them, be at home with them. And then on, we can start, thinking, and then on, we can start repairing our faith in humankind, because this is what we need now for several reasons, because of capitalism, because of the fact that we are seeing the worst representations of humankind for the last several decades, and because of the fact that we are in front of our eyes, the world is crumbling. I think we somehow, as human beings, begin to lose our faith that we can do better. And then we are retreating now. And ironically, we are retreating to our homes at the moment. But I think this retreat is deeper than the lockdown itself. So what I am planning to talk about in the coming months is this: how can we repair the faith in ourselves? How can we repair the faith in togetherness and in humankind in general? And I do think that this could be done if we come together and if we talk about it. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Ece. That was such a graceful and eloquent tour of covering so many issues and many things that a lot of us are thinking about. You managed to identify. I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions and then we'll open up. Please do, if any of you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and then I will pick them up and ask them. So I'm sure you will have questions to ask. But I wanted to ask you, Ece, your book, How to Lose a Country, I mean, it's such a precise categorization. It's this brilliant methodological categorization of what's happening, of this lurch from democracy to authoritarianism, or to the rise of populism, as you call it, in this sort of sanitized way we're describing it, or the rise of the populist right, which is another sort of safe way of not saying authoritarianism or fascism, as you identify in the book. But what I'm wondering is, you mentioned just now the fact that we're all in this together now, essentially. But I wonder if what you were saying, this identification of the hallmarks of this descent into authoritarianism, it sort of met against the sort of invisible protective shield in countries like the US and the UK of exceptionalism, of, well, maybe that sort of stuff happens over there, but it really isn't going to happen, not here. And then following on from that, just this inability to, even now that it's happened, to actually categorize it or locate it as such, and then be able to identify how to tackle it. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, Rachel, very good question, because I have been suffering from this. The book was published in 2019, and it's 2 years now. And I was tweeting the other day, oh, finally the book has become timely, because I see many people from United States and Britain talking about the book, finally. because when I was talking about the book, when it first came out, and when I told them that Trump will be here for a while, just, you know, get used to it, and, or, you know, be aware, and Boris Johnson will be your prime minister, ha, ha, ha. But then they really, as you told, oh, that this kind of thing happens in crazy countries, crazy part of the world where Turkey is. It doesn't work like that. And this, what we are going through, is not about craziness of a country. First of all, every country has fragile consensuses, and right-wing populism or fascism, I think it's time we call it fascism. Fascism feeds on these, you know, fragile consensuses, and it's, you know, terrorized the political sphere by leaking into these cracks and opening them. So it's not easy to say for any country that, you know, our consensuses are solid, they're, you know, fully, you know, they're fortified and so on. There is no such thing. And it is not about the country itself. It is what's happening to them, which is, which has the, you know, which has the pattern. The pattern, you know, there are many people who are writing about right-wing populism or this new form of fascism. I think we can categorize them into two. Part of them, and there are many, they think that this is a passing by fancy in 21st century and it will go away. It is just a political accident that for some reason happened to all of us at the same time. And there are those of us, and these first group still have full trust in political institutions, in democratic institutions. And the second group, which I belong to, we say that this is the natural consequence of neoliberal politics in the last few decades. And it won't go away, and we cannot trust institutions, unfortunately, because they have been weakened, and only because the main contract of democracy has been compromised for the main contract of capitalism. Because all these decades, especially since the end of 1970s, the understanding was that we don't need social justice. Social justice is not inseparable piece of democracy. The second group, the critics of fascism, where I belong to, we say that there is no democracy without social justice. This is what happens when there is no social justice, when the education gap is such big, such wide, and when people are suffering from real social injustice. So the second group, I think, I feel more realistic comparing to the first group, because on and on, the reality, political reality, proves that we are right. Americans are quite proud nowadays because Trump has left the building, and he did it, you know, while I Did It My Way was playing. He went onto his chopper and he flew away. But then we have to remember, it is not even the Capitol Hill insurrection. That was, you know, it is important, but the most important part is that the entire American democratic establishment had to come together to get rid of this man, and he still had 70 million votes. And they are true believers. It's not like, you know, it wasn't an accident. They saw him for 4 years, pussy groping, you know, all the shameless acts, all the, you know, illegal acts, all this, you know, all this nonsensical spectacle, and still they voted for him. So I think, you know, today, one of the most important problems of the United States, or it will be, how are we going to stick together? How are we going to be a society again? Which actually was a little bit implied in Joe Biden's inaugural speech. And this goes for every other country that is dealing with right-wing populism. It is not the democratic institutions, it's not the state only, but also the societies are disintegrating. because this, this speech of hatred, this narrative of hostility, have become so integrated into the societies that half of the society thinks the other half of the society as absolute evil or absolute ignorant, absolute idiot, and so on. So it is not, and then when the conditions are such, even your very personal relationships are affected by it. So your life becomes over politicized. Everything is political now, and then you cannot get out of it. And then this creates an emotional exhaustion as well. So there's no exception, unfortunately. India is no different than United States. And what people should understand, if you ask me, is that yes, Modi and Trump are alike, but we are also, the other ones are alike too. That's how we can share the burden of feeling completely, mad or whatever. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. And thank you all as well for all the questions that are coming in the chat. Some of these questions are so relevant to exactly what you just talked about. So I'll bring a few of those in a moment. There's also a lot of thanks and praise coming in for you, Ece, which I also echo. I wanted to know, one of the points that you make in your book, How to Lose a Country, is that one about, the populist right, or the being the authentic ones, representing the real people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that has quite often been quite paralyzing for the left. And in the UK, you can see that it has paralyzed the current left-wing parties. And we had this whole thing of, people being so keen to show that they were authentic or they were representative of the real people. And there was like, I don't know if you remember or you saw, there was this very weird component of sort of coffee, cappuccino as a social signifier, as a consumption of it showed that you were the metropolitan elite and not down with the real people, which was a real sort of pretzeling of in order to fit what was expected in this new reality that you described so well. And you also talk in your book about how, this other side that we represent, the not authoritarians, the not fascists, the not populist right, of without that sort of political representation, you say if your moral values are not politically organized, you end up feeling quite alone. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, of how ineffective the other side is being at countering this resurgent right that we're seeing.
Yeah. Today I saw that Labour Party is going patriotic and flag loving just to prove that they are real people as well. So I was
dressing smartly.
Yeah, immediately remembered how CHP Social Democrats were trying to prove that they are Muslims as well. So there is no choice other than rejecting this classification, this this polarization, and it is the way is to go out of this is not to try to prove that we are real as well. That's why in the very beginning I said it is logically impossible, and we are put in this impossible position, and there is nothing you can do except for rejecting the entire mentality. One thing about being ineffective, there's this illusion of effectiveness, and this is mostly thanks to social media. People mostly in every country where a new form of fascism shows up, what they do, and unfortunately they keep on doing this, they are expressing their emotions, how mad they are, how devastated they are, how shocked they are, and all these astonished, stunned, and so on. Expressing emotions and doing it every day for years has no consequence on the political reality whatsoever. It is only exhausting for you. So this is politics, and this is one of the reasons I wrote the book. Get rid of the emotions. They are useless. I mean, like, see the picture. This is the picture. This is what's happening to you. And one of the most exhausting emotions that this new form of fascism creates is secondhand shame, vicarious shame. Every day we go to bed and then we wake up to a country where the leader or it's his supporters commit moral sins, and we feel ashamed because of those sins that we have no part in. And coming from Turkey, I can say that this happens to everyone every day, and every morning people go on social media to see what happened now, what did they do now, what am I going to be ashamed of now. So there are no magic beans here. It is old school getting organized, being political, and standing your ground. Being political is not expressing emotions, or being political is not getting into a fight with a party apparatchik or Brexiteer and so on. It is not that. It is having proper, precise, and clear political argumentation. And in order to do that, you cannot do this individually, obviously. You have to come together and form a political ground for yourself. So what is most exhausting is this, expressing emotions and thinking that this is going to have a political consequence. It doesn't, because we are living what we are experiencing. This new form of fascism, as I told in the beginning, uses shamelessness as a political tool. So calling them to shame, inviting them to this moral ground has no effect, because they don't care. Simply, they don't care. And they are proudly, they are carrying shamelessness as a badge of honor, almost. So don't go into this vicarious shame. Don't go into emotions. Just see the clear picture, and then you decide what to do. I'm like, this would be my advice, so to speak, if I may.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that. And you've mentioned quite a few times this concept of, social justice, and how, progressive parties don't really mention that concept anymore, and how important it is to be heard. There's so many questions coming in. Thank you all so much for these questions. They are brilliant. Might not have time to go through them all, so I just want to thank everyone who posted, even if we don't, because they're terrific and very thought-provoking, and lots of praise again, Ece, for your discussion and your insights here.
All the sweet things I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're such a cheering analyst.
I'm going to sing at the end just to cure the malaise that I caused.
Well, we should also mention at the end your new book, which sounds a lot more cheerful. Together, 10 Choices for a Better Now. But I just want to go into some of the questions you're being asked in the chat. There's one from Erhan Kula. I'm just going to sort of paraphrase, because the point is that there's, all these nasty events happening in front of public eyes, and yet there is this solid cohort of people that is still voting for all these, villains in power. And we can see that, as you mentioned before, of the solid voter base that still turned out for Trump. In the UK, there's just a solid base of, Boris Johnson Conservative support, regardless of their conduct with the pandemic. So what is going to shift that? I mean, it just seems so resilient and impervious, that chunk of support.
Chunk. I think the not surprise, but how shall I? The most important thing here is voting part. Because if we diminish democracy to voting and ballot boxes, that is the end of the story anyway. Because until the ballot box, there are other institutions in democracy, there are other traditions in democracies that actually create a democracy. But when it's ballot boxes, which we are experiencing in the world now, it becomes something, it's like a theatrics of democracy. It is not even democracy. So if you don't have the same time slot on BBC, let's say, or in Turkish case, TRT, the state TV, if you don't have the same capital, capital power of capital in order to organize, if your ideas are considered as old school, oh, communist or whatever, whenever you talk about social justice, whereas the other guys are like free to, they have free pass on every channel, then the democracy is already crippled before getting to the ballot box. And also right in the beginning, they do something, these leaders do something, which when I say like this, it sounds mystic, but they do it through political tools. They make these supporters identify with the leader. And then on, it is almost impossible to break that, this symbiotic sort of life of the leader and its supporters. It is really, really hard. What we can work on are the guys who just voted for Boris Johnson, Trump, and so on for any reason, for not being religiously, except for the religious devotees of these leaders, we can, work with people. These are political matters, but then as soon as they terrorize the political language, they terrorize the political sphere, and then they seize the power, sometimes illegally, sometimes illegitimately. And then on, when they start, when these leaders start winning the elections, I think there is this, they create this aura of untouchable person, this unbeatable, and then you cannot do anything against them. And by the way, one thing, we should make one thing clear. Sometimes you cannot beat it. The other day I was watching a documentary about Franco era in Spain. It is 40 years. And this guy literally killed half of the country to rule the country. And it's 40 years. People were defeated. Sometimes, yes, you are defeated, and then you get up and continue again. In Turkey, I feel we are defeated, for instance. So yeah, we have to find other ways to get organized and to resist and to change the democracy for the better. Yeah, that's all I want to say, actually.
Thanks so much for that. I just wanted to ask you briefly, there's quite a lot of questions about Turkey in the chat, and in particular about the student protests and the detaining of students that's happened quite recently in Turkey, and then being described as terrorists, I believe, in the past few hours. And because there's just so many people asking, I wonder if you could just say something about that, please.
I was waiting for the end. I want to say something about it, actually. It is, what we are going through is devastating, really, on several levels. And it's very close to my heart, as well as many other people. I'm sure many other people in Turkey feeling the same thing. Boğaziçi is Oxbridge type of university for Turkey. It's the Yale of Turkey. So these people, these students are creme de la creme of the Turkish human resources. So seeing them being brutally beaten it breaks your heart for the country as well. as you know, there is this brain drain from Turkey, and one can see with naked eyes why it is happening, because the police, the government, the oppressive power has no mercy, and we have seen it, that there is no mercy and there won't be any mercy. And people are calling for mercy sometimes, as well as resistance. For those who don't know what's happening in Turkey, in Boğaziçi University, there is a new dean, which is directly appointed by the government, Mr. Erdogan, actually, by the president. And this dean is already blamed by, it's documented that he committed plagiarism. He is not qualified to be Bosphorus University dean, and most importantly, he is not elected in the elections which happened among the academic staff. So both the academic staff and the students have been resisting since 2 weeks, I guess, and several support actions have taken place in several other countries to show support. And if you want to read more, there was a very good piece on New York Times yesterday, so it tells the entire story. As of today, hundreds of students, more than 150 students were arrested, taken into the custody, and now several of them are out, but some of them are taken back into custody. So it's going to be a harassment. What is most terrifying is that these students have been put on target not only by Mr. President, who called them today terrorists, but also the partner of the government, ultra-nationalist leader, Devlet Bahçeli, who said that anything must be done to disperse this resistance. And also the Minister of State Affairs was no less merciless towards the students. So there is this fear of Gezi uprising repeating itself, especially among the highest echelon of power in Turkey. And I think they are quite afraid of the streets, because except for streets, they're controlling everything. There is this total control of life, I could say, I think. So except for streets, the streets are the only thing they cannot control. And there were some demonstrations in several cities and several places in Istanbul to support these kids. And the kids are amazing. They're doing amazing, they're showing amazing resilience. I hope none of them gets hurt. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for addressing that. Thank you again, everyone, for all these brilliant questions. I've got one from Fatima. She says, hello, my name is Fatima. Firstly, thanks for the lovely speech. She has a question that's about the COVID-19 process that also affects the human conditions that we find ourselves in. And what role do you think this will play in 21st century people and humanity and politics? What will be the impact to this political climate that we find ourselves in?
Some of us hope, including me, that it will show, it will make the contradictions of the right-wing populist leaders clearer, and it will make it more, it will make their impotency obvious. But then it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And thinking back to Spanish flu, which killed more people than Second World War did, and we don't really remember what Spanish flu was, I don't think we're going to remember COVID-19 in a few years, because this is human nature. We want to forget horrible things, and we will forget it. But then I think if something happens, if social movements are activated in these days, it's going to be harsher than it would have been before COVID-19. We saw it in Black Lives Matter movement, for instance. It was more hardcore, I would say, because people knew that they were risking their lives when they are going on street. So they were acting accordingly. So if something happens in terms of, social injustice, I think it will be more brutal than it would have been before COVID-19. And I'm expecting such a thing sometime in summer. We'll see. I hope, it won't be too brutal.
Well, that's the bar set pretty low, isn't it? Let's hope it won't be too brutal. There's a couple more questions that I want to get through this evening. These are all really terrific questions. Thank you all for submitting them. There's one that's asking, do you think all these steps are set on purpose by right-wing politicians, or could it be as a consequence of their insufficiency in terms of lack of global vision, intellectuality, etc.? And I suppose that's a question that is often asked, isn't it? Because they seem so chaotic and shambolic. And so is this really by design? And is it trying to paper over something else?
You mean right-wing populists or the opposition parties? I couldn't get that part.
Right-wing populists and politicians, yeah.
Yeah, well, you're lucky, actually. Like, British people are lucky. Americans are even more lucky, because your guys are not as talented as Mr. Erdogan. We are dealing with a real political genius in Turkey. So Boris Johnson, he cannot handle it. If it was Boris Johnson in Turkey, I always thought that if it was Trump or Boris Johnson, we could have get rid of him in 4 years. It would be so easy. And Turkey has more sensitive and fragile, problems with its consensuses. So, yeah, I think this does not matter how shambolic, how messy they are. What matters is what they build throughout the time they are in power. And once they're in power, it's so not easy to stop them, because as soon as they have the state power, they begin to build economic networks. And these networks, these economic webs, they start with main arteries, but then it goes to capillary systems. So all these supporters, they're not only religious devotees of these leaders, but also if they know that if this leader falls down, they go down with him. Their livelihoods are connected to the leader. So I am wondering what Boris Johnson is doing in terms of building up an economic web that will keep him in power for the second term, for instance. Trump was doing it, and it worked until a certain degree, because that's why he, one of the reasons he got 70 million votes in the United States. So we have that in Turkey, and that web, that economic web, still holds Erdogan. It is not because he's super popular, but because people know that if he goes down, they go down with him.
All right. I just wanted to put to you a final question. It's sort of an amalgam of a lot of questions that are coming up. Someone has asked the impact of age, the fact that there's an aging demographic and an age divide in terms of right-wing and left-wing politics, which we've seen is quite sharply defined in the UK, for instance. There's a lot of people asking, what can collective movements do better not to not lose, or how can we bring back together societies that have been so polarized by these populist right politics? And it all sort of points in the direction potentially of your new book, which It's coming out in May, Together, 10 Choices for a Better Now. Does it contain the answers to some of these questions being posed here?
Yeah, but it is Together is not a book about real politics. I'm not talking about Trump or Boris Johnson or Erdogan, not at all. Thank God. It is more a little bit more philosophy and morality, because what we are going through, without even noticing, we are going through a moral deformation. It is not easy to be represented by the worst of humankind constantly. And that is why I said, we're losing our faith, because what we see is Boris Johnson, Trump, his supporters. And then we think, is this what human is? It is the most exhausting thing for humankind, I think, to see constantly these worst examples of our kind. So what I try to do in Together, coming out in May, is to propose 10 choices. I chose 10 words like anger, love, faith, dignity, and so on. And I try to bring together a new narrative for the new human being. Because it's not only the political system we have to change, but we also will have to change our moral values. We have to renew them and repair the damaged ones. And the book is about that, actually. Hopefully it will work.
Well, I'm sure many of us are very much looking forward to reading that. I think we're going to have to leave it there, but I just want to say there are so many messages that are saying thank you. It's an absolute pleasure listening to you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your book. And I would like to echo that. It really has been a pleasure and an honor to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Rachel. Thank you so much. You've been so kind and generous.
That's lovely to hear. And I want to thank everybody who joined us on this event online, and for all the engagement and the brilliant questions in the chat as well. So many thanks to everyone.
Thank you,
Much
everyone. See you. Bye.